All right, taping this Tuesday afternoon. Jackie MacMullan is here. The basketball offseason is upon us. I've been talking about this. I talked about it on my pod on Sunday, talked about it on Zach Lowe's podcast yesterday. It really seems like they're pushing up this season to basically, they're acknowledging there's no way they're going to have fans anytime soon. Might as well keep the schedule relatively intact so they can keep the 2021-22 season, protect that 100%. So we might have like a really fast run here where all of a sudden we have draft mid-November. They'll push free agency up a tiny bit. Yep. And then potentially the season could start Christmas earliest, MLK weekend the latest. What have you been hearing about topsy-turvy stuff? Because every year we've had at least one crazy thing has happened basically since 2014. What is your prediction for the crazy thing this year?
The crazy thing this year, I think the pandemic's going to come back and bite the NBA if they start too soon. I do, because I just don't see an end to this. I'm not one of those people that believes it's going to disappear on November 3rd, for instance. And the other thing that I think the real reason they're pushing it, Bill, as hard as they are, it's the fans in part, but it's also because the numbers were horrible. Opposite football. And I don't think you could stress that enough. They thought, or even in the summertime, they thought they would have a captive audience in the summer. And I have a lot of friends, as I know you do, who love basketball. And they just couldn't, as much as they love basketball, they had a hard time pivoting to watching it regularly in the summer. So the numbers were not at all what the NBA had hoped. That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah, I think it was eye-opening for them where they thought maybe August and September could actually be a good thing for them, because they had been talking for years about what if we started on Christmas Day, went all the way through. And, the combination, not just football, but I think the election cycle too, having to deal with that every 4 years, where basically from July on, every 4 years, people are just going to drift to the news channels, the debates, all that stuff. The combo of that, and that's even before we get into the social justice stuff this year, which definitely hurt at least a tiny bit.
Oh, I think it hurt more than a tiny bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but the football thing, they don't, they had it good the old way, where it was the finals owned June, and then they own the offseason in July, and those were kind of the two dead months where they're only going against baseball. I think they want to protect that and get back to that. And if they have to make it a 70-game season and a sprint this year and start early and have no fans, you're making the key point, though. How do you protect against the stuff that's plaguing the NFL right now, where every week there's 3 teams that have something going? I don't know how you fix that. I mean, they have less players. That would be one good thing.
Well, that's true. And I mean, the NFL just, the contact, the NBA is obviously a physical game, but the contact in the NFL, you just watch it from week to week and you say, how have they even managed as well as they have? And, Bill Belichick, I was so surprised that he went to the practice thing, the multiple mentions of practice a mere week after his reluctant protege in some ways, Mike Vrabel, had dealt with COVID in ways that no one else has. Yeah. And just destroyed the Buffalo Bills. I just thought it was interesting. I was surprised Bill Belichick went that way.
I thought it was a solid excuse coming out of a game where the Broncos completely demolished them. Man, we needed more practice. Honestly, that was embarrassing.
But you know what? Like, if Drew Lock had stayed on the field 10 more minutes, he was going to give him another chance to win.
True.
I mean, that was just an embarrassing loss. So I was just surprised. Bill's not an excuse maker. One of the things I like about him. That was surprising to me.
All right,
we're getting off the rails a bit. Sorry, but.
Well, if you're one of the NBA contenders right now, which the list is like 8 to 10 teams,
sure,
and you're looking for a possibility of all of a sudden this could speed up, and we are going to have the draft. I think it's November 15th, 16th, somewhere in there, and then free agency fast 18th, free agency fast after, and the cap's going to be pretty hard. It's going to be like 109.
Right now, it's a little lower than I thought. Right, lower than you thought. I thought.
Well, because I think they're trying to protect for the year after.
Right,
would be my guess.
The Giannis year. Yes.
You don't have marquee free agents like we've had in the past. It seems like they're more stacked at 21. You also have at least 3 teams that we know about: Toronto, Dallas, and Miami. I think are safe bets to at least be looking ahead to Giannis in 2021.
Right.
And then you have Golden State with this number 2 pick, with a giant trade exception that expires pretty soon, but they would take a huge luxury tax if they put another hit, if they took another player in there.
Yeah, I can't do that.
And they have a chance to be a contender right away if they can turn that number 2 pick into somebody who can play right away for them. So they're balancing what's that pick worth. On Zach's podcast this week, we were trying to figure out, like, what is that pick worth? What do you think it's worth?
I mean, it's not a great draft, right?
Right.
It's just not. There's no Zion in this draft. And because everything's compressed, I've talked to so many scouts and coaches are like, we can't bring guys in, although guys have come in, but it's not the way we like to do it. You know, it's just it's always been an inexact science, and we have a million examples of that. But I think even more so now because people just aren't sure because with all the analytics aside, almost every GM you've ever talked to tells you they just want to look at the kid in the eye and spend some time with him and talk with him. And that's been hard to do, especially if you have to have a mask on. So I think this is a really interesting year for, I think that pick has been incredibly devalued because of all of that, to be honest. And,
well, that's how you do stuff too. You like being in the room with people. You like interacting with them, and that's how you get some of your best stuff. And I'm sure you've even suffered with reporting you've done because basically now you're doing phone calls.
Yeah, it's been the worst. It's just so horrible. I was just talking to Nick Nurse about this the other day because, you know, Nick's doing his rounds a little bit with his book, which is so great. There's some great stuff in that book, and I'm happy for Nick Nurse because he's one of the guys people should be rooting for. And now his assistant, Nate, gets the Pacers job, which I just love that because one of my favorite stories from them winning and then Kawhi going was I did this whole story about offseason for coaches, and Steve Kerr was on the beach when he found out Kevin Durant was leaving, and he overheard it from some guys going, "Dude, KD's going to Brooklyn." Like that's how he found out for real. And so I was kind of going to every coach, and I said to Nick, "Well, how did you find out Kawhi was gone?" And, you know, we all kind of knew it probably was going to happen, but he said that he and Nate were at a Prince impersonator contest in Vegas. So they're at this concert, they're champions, you know, they're celebrating. And the Prince impersonator, who I guess was really, really good, was singing Purple Rain. And they're like, "Purple Rain," you know, they're doing all this. And then both of their phones ding at the same time. And they look down and it's Kawhi telling them, "Yeah, I'm going home." And that's how they found out. That's how they found out they lost Kawhi. So, but Nate is like Nick's clone. I mean, they think the same way. People, I'm not 100% sure about this, so I don't want to. I can't say this with certainty, but I think Nate might have been the first one that said box and one. You know, I'm not sure, but you know, they think alike, and obviously the Pacers, they're not a big market team, and they don't spend like a big market team. They never have, and they never will. So they were looking for the next Nick Nurse, and I think they might have found him.
Well, and that's a kind of a fun job too, because that team has talent and a couple trades, you know, but I think but with Sabonis and with Brogdon
Turner.
And some of their young guys.
So would you keep Sabonis and Turner together? That's my question to you. No way, right? And you keep Sabonis, right?
Oh,
I keep Sabonis. Yeah, I love
Sabonis. 100,000%. Because
so maybe,
you can actually initiate offense through him, which I think was the big revelation with him last year. Like he could, you know, off the dribble, he could create for other guys, which is really unusual for a 5.
Yeah, they're kind of an interesting team. And like, can you convince Oladipo it's a great place to be? And can you be convinced that Oladipo's worth the max contract? Because I'm not sure we know how healthy he is yet. Too small a sample size for me anyway to say that.
Well, we were talking, Zach and I were trying to figure out if Indiana could get into, if there's a 3-teamer or something with the second pick with Golden State and like Brooklyn as the third team, stuff like that. I have no idea what Oladipo's value is around the league because he's in the last year of his deal.
Yeah,
he did not look the same as he did 2 years ago before he got hurt.
Right.
And we have no idea if he's going to be the guy from 2.5 years ago ever again.
Right.
And not to mention, you don't know if you can re-sign him. So I don't really know what you do with that.
I think you have to play it out. And I think, you know, I'm not going to judge Oladipo and what we saw of him in the bubble because he was coming off a horrific injury, number one. Number two, that whole environment is bizarre and strange. And number three, we know he didn't want to go. His intent was not to go. And the Pacers were like, okay, you don't have to go. And I think the league is like, well, if you don't go, you're not getting paid. I think that's what happened. I really do. So he goes and he's, you know, wary. I don't blame him. Wary for not just coming off that serious injury, but just wary of everything else that's gone on around you. I think you're pretty vulnerable after a major injury like that. So I'm not willing to say that he'll never be the same because he's a young guy. He works hard. You've been around him. He's a great kid.
Yeah.
I think there's a chance he could still be a really great player. But, and it's a big but, if you're another team, not the Pacers, if you're another team, are you gambling on that? I'm not. Not now. Maybe by February, well, I was going to say by February, but let's do the new math. I don't know, whatever the trade deadline will be in this new world that we embark on for next season. But if you're the Pacers, don't you have to maybe pay him a max? Because you're not ever getting a marquee free agent to come here, right?
I just don't think he's going to stay unless
I don't
they
either,
pay him more than everybody else pays him. So that would be their trump card.
Right. But and if you look at it and you evaluate and you decide, well, he's not really the same. If you're the Pacers and you've always been fiscally responsible because you have no choice, maybe in the end you don't pay him either.
I think he's the toughest kind of guy to handle because he's like a tweener superstar in the sense that he was a superstar for about 4 months. So he has it.
4 weeks almost.
Yeah, whatever it was.
It was
but
quick.
he looked like what we saw from Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs. Like, Oladipo can do that. But he didn't do it for that long. But now he thinks he's a superstar.
Yeah.
And
they all feels
like he's in this. Yeah. But he at least has the resume of like, hey, remember those 4 months when I was a superstar?
Right.
And that makes it tough because it's like he's coming off a major injury and we haven't seen it since. But you're paying him basically for past performance, which is how you get in trouble in the NBA when you're paying somebody for what they did 2 years ago.
Well, that's why
I don't really know the answer.
You wait. That's why you have to wait, I think. If you're the Pacers, if you're Oladipo, you bet on yourself and you wait too because you know your value isn't where it should be or where you think it can be. So prove it.
Would you trade Turner and Aaron Holiday and the 23rd pick, whatever pick they have for Rudy Gobert?
For Rudy Gobert. Say it again. Aaron Holiday.
Miles Turner.
I like all the Holidays, but I really like Drew better than Aaron. No offense to Aaron. I may love Aaron more someday.
So if you're ranking the Holidays, Drew is one.
Yeah, Drew's one. I really like Drew Holiday.
I really like Aaron. That's why I thought if you
Aaron
put him
too.
and Turner together, that's the foundation of something.
Yeah, in the then and now, in the here and now, I like Aaron. I just don't know what Aaron is yet. I like all the Holidays. I'm all in on the Holidays. I'll take all three of them. So Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert. So can I just go on my little Rudy Gobert rant?
Yeah, because I think he's available and I wanted to talk about him.
So I like, obviously, Rudy Gobert he's a great defensive presence. He's a star, but is he a superstar?
I would say no.
I would say no as well. And I think this part of what happened to their season went way under the radar a little bit this year. You know, we had the little beef between Rudy and Donovan, and I do believe that can be patched up. We've talked about this 1,000 times.
Yeah.
You don't have to love each other the most. You don't even have to really like each other. You just have to respect one another and get
Draymond and KD accepted. I think that got too personal.
That probably
anyway.
Did. Yeah. And, Mikhail and Bird, we thought it did, but they're back around. They're good, I think.
Yeah.
Although I haven't asked them about it, but I think so. Anyway, the undercurrent during that Utah season when things weren't going that great, and, Conley wasn't the fit they thought he was, although I think he could be, but they just ran out of time. Right. And he missed that shot. People forget about that shot. Just think if he made that shot.
Yeah,
right?
that Denver went 2 extra rounds.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, right? It's how I remember talking. Mike Malone, he knows better than anyway. Talk about make or miss league. It's so is. Ask Danny Green, who won a championship, and they're still not going to forgive him. Snoop Dogg goes off on him. My man, Snoop Dogg. What was he doing? I'm so upset about that. Yeah. But anyway, I'm getting way off topic. But when things were going well with them, even before the bubble, there was an undercurrent of him just he wanted more touches. And I'm like,
Dwight Howard syndrome.
Yeah, what are you talking about, dude? So I'm not as all in on Gobert as other people. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I think I just think he's got a limited skill set for this world that we live in now, this NBA we live in now. And I wouldn't want to build my team around him.
On the flip side, because I agree with you, on the flip side, the Lakers just won a title by overpowering everybody. And
they did.
You were covering the league in the mid 80s when we had the Twin Towers in the finals against the Big Three.
Right.
And every team in the league is like, holy shit, we got to get bigger.
Yep.
And people started drafting centers 10 spots earlier than they should have gone.
Yep.
People started giving crazy free agent contracts to center, leading to John Contract.
Yep.
John Contract.
So, you know,
John Consack.
Shaq went to a game with his dad that he was playing, I guess, probably with Atlanta at the time. I'd have to do the math. And, you know, they were living in San Antonio. And Shaq got home and they're walking to the house. And his dad like whacks him on the back of the head. And Shaq turned and he goes, "What the hell is that for?" He goes, if that white stiff can make all that money, you better make 10 times that." Like his father was so mad about that. Shaq loves telling that story.
And McElvain too. That was another one.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so we had this run in the 80s. So we've seen this happen when there's an overcorrection to somebody that won the title. And in this case, it's like, if you're in the West, you have to go through LeBron and Davis, and you also have to go through Jokic. So in a weird way, Gobert is a little more valuable than he maybe was a year ago. But I'm with you. I don't feel like he's franchise $28 million a year guy.
Yeah, he's valuable, but not in the way the two guys are that you just mentioned. I mean, the reason Jokic is so valuable is because he does everything really but play center. I mean, he's a good rebounder and everything, but my God, he's an amazing passer. And Anthony Davis, I was wrong about him. Every time he took a three, I was like, if I'm guarding him, I'm like, amen, brother, keep shooting. I was a little bit wrong about that. You know, you think that way about Giannis until he proves everybody wrong. And by the way, I think Giannis will get to the point where he'll shoot it well enough that it'll prove everybody wrong. But a coach that I really respect said this to me about that. He's like, everybody is like, why doesn't Ben Simmons shoot threes? You know, he should be shooting threes. And he's like, even if he could shoot them, you know, adequately, the same thing's going to happen at the end of the game that happens to Giannis at the end of the game. They're still going to give him the shot. So even if he hits two a game, just like Giannis, in the end, you're still going to bet on that as being your best default when you're guarding players like that. That's why it does you no good to be a middling 3-point shooter. You either have to be able to shoot it or not.
Davis, you couldn't give him the shot anymore.
No, that's my point.
Yeah,
that surprised me. Yeah, that really did.
They were wet. I mean, they weren't just like, they weren't going through and like snapping the net where it just seemed like every time he shot one, it was going to go in. Yeah. I got to be honest, I didn't know he did it during the season, but it's a little different with those kind of stakes and somebody's still making them. So yeah, if I'm trying to win the title this year, like let's take the Celtics. You knew they'd come up at some point.
I can't imagine why we would take that.
Can't believe we talked about them. You can't realistically win the title with the centers you had last year. You just can't. I mean, you couldn't even get to the finals this year with those centers. So if there was ever a year for them to roll the dice, they have these 3 first-round picks. They have the Rob Williams and Langford kind of pseudo assets. Marcus, if they really wanted to get creative. Hayward is an expiring contract if they want to get creative. Mm-hmm. I feel like they're coming out of this with somebody who can play the 5. I would be shocked if they didn't.
I'm interested to see if you're right, because I don't think that's how Brad Stevens views basketball, even after what happened to his team. And I might be wrong, but he's such a proponent of positionless, which is an impossible word to say. I'm going to try it again. Positionless. There, I did it. Basketball. It's such a terrible word. And so I think he still believes, you know, maybe like Daryl Morey does, that it can happen because those guys are so heavily involved in analytics. I think you need a serviceable big. I think Daniel Tice, I really thought Daniel Tice gave them just about everything he could at his size. It's funny to say that Daniel Tice is small, but when you start playing smash ball, bully ball, he's small. I know that sounds crazy, but he kind of is.
And he gets in foul trouble too easily is the other thing.
Well, but that's, you know, I think a lot of that is just reputation. Like I bet that'll change a year from now, because this is the first year that he played consistently, and referees just immediately see big white guy from Germany or, you know, I really do. I think the refs he never got a break on any of it. And I'm not complaining about it. I think there's a lot of people that fit into that category. We just happen to be talking about him. And I think next year he gets a different look from the refs, because I really do think that happens with young bigs.
In the pantheon of Celtics who got treated with the most disrespect by referees, Not since Ed Pinckney do I remember somebody just getting less calls. Ed Pinckney, just no calls. It almost ruined his career. They just would never give him anything. Daniel Tice, same thing. But listen, what you say about Stevens is right. He believes in positionless basketball.
Oh, how come you could say that so easily? That makes me jealous and angry.
What?
You said that positional list. You said it so easily.
Positionless. I didn't do the pause between the position and the list.
That's what
I just don't think you can win a title like that anymore. And if the goal is to win the title, they're not going to be able to do it with this kind of pseudo small ball lineup because it's not 2015 anymore. There's too many teams that you have to go through who have size. And even Miami weirdly seemed kind of small in that Lakers series. And I know Bam was hurt.
Bam wasn't Bam.
I don't know if they should have played Leonard and Olynyk more just to have bodies to bang, but
Olynyk's
that was my legacy
from
that finals.
But wasn't Olynyk just he had such a weird series because he was, nailed to the bench, which you understood because we saw him in Boston all those years and he just could never rebound. I never seen anybody who can't box out or doesn't know how or doesn't try. I don't know.
He's got short arms.
Yeah, I know that short arm thing. But if you box out, it doesn't matter how long your arms are. If you have position, it does not matter. So that drove me crazy with him. And yet, when they played him, because they had to, because everybody was down, he kind of fit the style of that series a bit because he could shoot, he could space the floor a little bit. So I kind of thought he should have played a little more, to be honest.
Me too.
I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am.
I agree with you, especially because it didn't seem like Bam totally had it, and I didn't realize how much Bam needed Dragic, and I think we forget that sometimes. And it made me think, like, looking at some of the available big men, you take somebody like Drummond, right? How many times has Drummond ever played with a good point guard? I'm not a huge Drummond fan, but he is a guy who can, roll to the rim and be up around the rim and all that stuff. And he's never played with anybody like Dragic. And you saw Bam without Dragic, and all of a sudden he looked pretty ordinary.
Right.
And I just wonder, like, does that make me want to take a roll of the dice on guys who have never been in the right situation? It's almost like a wide receiver who hasn't played with the right quarterback yet. And I'm sure there's some dudes out there, but I think the Celtics need to get bigger. That's especially because now you have Brooklyn back. You're going to have Golden State back.
That is
Philly
true.
will be different. I don't know if they're going to be better or worse, but they'll at least be different than they were last year. And Denver will be a year older. We don't know with Porter.
So maybe they can get Al Horford back. Is that what you want?
Oh, man, for Hayward?
No. God. You can't do that. But Al Horford, isn't that just what's happened to him? It's just unbelievable how quickly he was marginalized. Again, because 95%, there's 5% of the great players. You can put them on any team and it doesn't matter. Anthony Davis, LeBron, Giannis, Harden, all those guys. And then the other 95%, or maybe that's a little too high. Let's say 90% of them. It's just so much about fit. And the fit for Al Horford, you took away what he wanted to do more than anything. When you played the Sixers, you took away his spacing, the pick and roll capability, all of that. And it's funny, you mentioned Dragic, and he's a free agent, as you know, and all indications are that Miami will re-sign him,
Yeah.
But
they should.
Like, just for a second, let's play the fun fantasy game. What if you put Dragic on the Milwaukee Bucks? Think about what he does for Giannis. I mean, my goodness. Now, obviously, I don't even think they have the space to even consider doing that. But
it'd have to be a sign and trade.
It would have to be a sign and trade, which will never happen. But it's a fun fantasy game because we keep hearing about Chris Paul to the Bucks, and I get why we keep hearing that. Because he would unlock the pick and roll for Giannis. He would do so many things for Giannis. And even more than Giannis, he'll help Chris Middleton so much. He'll take so much pressure off Chris Middleton, Chris Paul would, on the offensive end of the floor. And then, of course, he's still very, very good defensively. And I know he's old, but I really think they should figure out a way to make that happen. I'm serious.
I weirdly think there's more of a market for Chris Paul than people realize compared to what happened last year, where you had to give away first-round picks to basically get rid of him. And now it's like I said on Zach's pod, there's a Ricky Rubio, Kelly Oubre trade, Chris Paul to Phoenix that just works under the cap, right? And if OKC just wants to get rid of that contract, put Rubio in at half the price, they could spin Oubre to wherever, and they're good to go. The Knicks, we know that the Knicks are being run by Leon Rose and World Wide West. Chris is their guy.
Those are Chris guys, yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to have the cap space. They're going to want him. Milwaukee's going to want him. So there's 3 teams right there, plus that 4th mystery team that we're probably not even thinking of.
Right.
And I do think there's a market for him, and I don't think Milwaukee's going to have enough. If I'm OKC, it's like, oh, cool, I can have Eric Bledsoe, the guy who's fallen apart in the last 2 postseasons.
Yeah, in the playoffs. No, I know.
Thanks.
You're right. And they don't have a ton of picks. They do have. I think they have their own pick this year, right? I think they do. But no, yeah, you're right. That probably won't get it done. But I understand why everybody's so stuck on that and fascinated with that, because if you look at Giannis, they should be running pick and roll for him, and they don't. Not enough. Not enough for a player of his caliber and ability.
Yeah, because George Hill, who was good for them last year, but he's not that kind of player.
No, he's not.
He's the guy who should be like playing with LeBron. So yeah, Milwaukee, I think, has less moves than people realize. And I think the Clippers are in a weird situation too, because they have this Montrezl Harrell extension. Everybody's just assuming they're going to do. And meanwhile, they couldn't play him against the Lakers or the Nuggets, the 2 teams they have to beat. Then you have Lou Williams, who's a disaster every postseason. And you have Patrick Beverley, who, it got leaked out this week. Kawhi was like, hey, can we get a point guard who can actually create shots for other guys?
Right.
So it feels like something's going to happen. Yeah, it could be a Rondo team.
No, Rondo makes so much sense for them on so many levels. I think, Lawrence Frank knows Rondo. Ty Lue knows Rondo. Rondo loves those guys. And, you muddle through with him during the regular season because for whatever reason, that's how it has to go, it appears. And then, the Lakers do not win that championship without Rondo. Not even close. When you think about how much they were struggling in the bubble before he came back. And he came back and it was like that. And part of it is because he can go up to LeBron, he can go up to AD, and he can tell them, you're not doing that right. Or why aren't you doing that? Or I did a piece with him and he was saying to me, I had to tell LeBron, stop looking at Kyle Kuzma like that. Do you understand how young Kyle Kuzma is? And you are LeBron James and you look at him like that. He's devastated for the next 3 days.
Right. That was a great quote.
But it's true. You can't do that. And so Rondo's the guy that can bring some levity to that. And then, in talking with Alvin Gentry while Rondo and Anthony Davis were together in New Orleans, it was Rondo that was saying to him, hey, man, you keep saying you want to win, but you got to give us a lot more than what you're giving us because you're the only chance we have at winning. So, dude, pick it up. Every team needs like that. And if there is a team that needed someone like that, I don't know, there was a better example of that than the Clippers. Because Kawhi Leonard is I don't know, he's a ghost. I don't know what kind of personality I keep wanting to hear the stories about, he's so different than what he's so different in the locker room. I haven't heard that yet. It may be true, but I haven't heard that. And Paul George isn't that guy. So Rondo, I would hope that they would have enough respect for Rondo to take whatever he has to dish out and say, all right, yeah, he's right. Let's do this. I think Rondo is such a great fit for the Clippers.
It's a great idea. I wish I had thought of it. We had Dudley on the pod last week, me, Dudley, and Russillo, and Dudley was talking about Rondo. And he said him and LeBron are at a whole other level IQ-wise. You have those guys together and they're just solving stuff. As a longtime Rondo guy, I was so happy, even though I hate the Lakers with every piece of my body.
Right.
I was so happy that he kind of had this moment, right? If you're talking about winners from the bubble.
Yep.
Once you go through Davis and, Tyler Hero, you go through all the, but then Rondo is definitely one of the 8 big winners because his career was basically done. And this was a guy that,
100%.
Until he blew out his knee in Boston.
Right.
I would have said, is Rondo a Hall of Famer? I'd be like, lock it down.
Yeah.
The fact that he came into the league when he was 19, all the reps that he got in 08, 09, 2010.
Right.
And it was just, he was headed, I thought Chris Paul was better than him, but if it was Chris Paul, Darren Williams, Rondo was clearly a close third to Darren Williams.
Yeah.
And then it just fell apart.
He was just so much more mentally tough than Darren Williams was. And his problem was he just never could shoot. And he still really can't shoot unless the game's on the line, which is just a whole nother thing. But, one of the things he told me in that story I did with him was when he tore his ACL, it's funny, they were playing the Heat. Was it the Heat? Yeah, it was the Heat. And someone Rondo had left and come back and he was coming back to see the doctor. And one of the other reporters, not me, Mark Murphy, I think, from the Herald, tweeted out that Rondo had a torn ACL. And I was like, oh my God. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go back and wait for him to come back because I knew he was coming back. So I'm waiting for him in the hallway and I run into Dwayne Wade, who's running into the back to go to the bathroom. He goes, what are you doing out here? I said, Rondo tore his ACL. He's like, oh man. He goes, oh, I hate that guy, but that's the worst. Like, it was such a visceral response because nobody ever, they can hate, be competitors all they want, but his face was just like, So then Rondo comes walking in and I go, he's with, I forget who, someone from the Celtics. And I said, hey, God, I'm sorry. He goes, what do you mean? I said, about your knee. He's looking at me and I go, you tore your ACL. And he's looking at me, he goes, nobody's told me that yet. I was like, ooh, but it wasn't me, man. Someone else had already tweeted it. But that's how, it was bad. I felt terrible. And he went in there. Doris Burke was working and she was outside. She got to go in. I wasn't doing the game for TV or anything. And then she came back out and said, yeah, he's tore it. But like someone, it got leaked to us, to the media before he even knew, unless he was, putting me on, which I guess is possible.
I remember I was doing TV that day because I was on Countdown that year.
Okay.
It was a Sunday game.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And the weird thing about it, that was the weirdest ACL injury ever because I think he kept playing after.
He did for a little bit.
And then he walked off the court and it seemed, and I remember watching it like, oh man, he probably sprained his MCL.
Yeah.
And that was the one time when the ACL thing came back. I was like, I couldn't believe it because it was like, he didn't tear his ACL.
And he told me just when I did this story in the finals, he said, that injury did me in. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, not only because it was a bad injury, but it was more than that. He said, because I hurt myself doing something I had done 8,000 times before. So when I started to rehab and started to play again, every time I went to do it was like, kind of like, remember he was like off, but he was just throwing like that. It was just a weird. And he said, it just was in my head. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to do this again. He said, I really almost retired. Like I really had a very hard time getting over that ACL injury. He said, I was a different player before that. I was never the same player. And then, then he goes to Dallas and the whole thing with Rick Carlisle, all of us knew that wasn't going to be a good match. And, Carlisle, to his credit, said, look, it was a bad match. It was a worse match for him with us than us with him, because we had no shooters. We had Dirk, but we had, it just wasn't a good fit. And then Bill Duffy told me his agent, longtime agent, said that, they're trying to find him a job after Sacramento, and they're calling around, and nobody will take him. So he calls John Paxson in Chicago and says, hey man, like keep an open mind. What about Rondo? And Paxson's like, oh man, I don't know. And he said, oh, call I'm going to forget his name now. He's a scout that discovered Tony Kukoc for the Bills. He's from Serbia, wherever. And his son had played on Sacramento, didn't play much, but was on that team. And Bill Duffy says, go talk to that scout of yours and go talk to his son. I'm telling you, Rondo's this incredible teammate because Rondo would go to the G League games of these kids that were the rookies at the end of the bench. And so that's how they convinced Chicago to give him another shot.
Well, I mean, Rondo's been public about this. Doc really did him disservice when, I think he kind of damaged him around the league a little bit by talking about how difficult he was. That was definitely a thing that happened.
It definitely happened, but in fairness to Doc, I think Rondo deserves some of that.
True.
It's pretty hard when you think you're the smartest guy in the room. And even if you are, you just have to show a little respect to your coaching staff, for instance, So, I mean, and Rondo and Doc are fine now. They're on that group text that they're all on with Big Baby, and they're fine. But they were both just really sick of each other, much like I would say Chris Paul and Doc by the time they were through. Another guy that's pretty smart and thinks he knows a lot. And, Doc's a former point guard. And after a while, that stuff wears on you. But it always works out in the end. Like, I think if Chris Paul and Doc Rivers were in a room, sharing some little baby quiches or something, I think they'd probably have a pretty good conversation at this point.
It's funny. Dudley on the pod last week was talking about the Clippers. That era, because he was on one of those teams, and Doc played him when he was hurt, which we didn't talk about on the pod, but it was pretty famous NBA story. He really put him in a position to fail. But he was saying that 14 Clipper team, when they blew that OKC series, he said the ramifications were beyond that year, because once that happened, he was like, they're never going to win now with that group. And when he said when they fell apart the next year against Houston, he wasn't surprised because he was like, that OKC thing was so traumatic.
Wow.
He just didn't feel like that nucleus was ever going to rebound from it. I'd never heard that before, but I thought that was pretty interesting because
that is interesting.
Those two Clipper years in retrospect are pretty amazing because they literally could have won the title either year and they didn't even get to the conference finals.
Yeah, no, all sorts of weird stuff happened all around that. And, I remember talking to Paul Pierce about his time with the Clippers, and, his relationship with Doc was very damaged during his time there too.
Yes.
And again, in fairness to Doc, Paul Pierce wasn't who he was. He wasn't the truth anymore. He was sort of like a half truth, maybe, And so he went there thinking something different than what happened. And there wasn't communication. That was the part that surprised me because that's what Doc's so good at, is communication. I think at one point, Paul told me Doc was going to trade him. And he came in and said, I think it might have even been to like the Knicks or something. I'm sorry, my memory's starting to go. But and Paul's like, I did not come all the way out here for you to do that to me. Like, you're not doing it. And to his credit, Doc's like, okay, I guess we won't.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot
of
the
last time you were on this podcast, we were talking about Doc's future, and I was saying he's going to Philly.
Yeah.
And it ended up happening. What do you think he does there? If you were Doc's consigliere with that job?
I told him to take the year off. He didn't listen to me. I'm already
do TV, right?
Yeah, I told him to sit on your deck and drink Chardonnay. You didn't listen, man. Well, I think you got to develop a rapport with Embiid almost immediately, and then right after that, a rapport with Ben Simmons, because I really think it's
so. That would be the order. You would go Embiid, then Simmons.
Only because I think Ben Simmons is used to Embiid. Embiid's like the face, the centerpiece, and we can argue all day which one we would take. It would be
I would go Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, Simmons is so talented, and I think he doesn't. I don't think he needs the adulation. If anything, I did a long piece with him this past calendar year too, and he said to me, the one thing I don't like about myself is that I need someone to kick me in the rear end. I wish I could kick myself in the rear end. I said, you're young, that'll come. But he was saying like the, and I'm drawing a blank right now. He's his high school coach at Mount Verde, who's done such an amazing job. It's a simple name. Oh, I'm blanking on it. But anyway, that guy would ride him like nobody's business. And he loved it. That's what he responded to. So I don't think he needs to be loved. I think Embiid needs to be loved. Does that make sense? And so give Embiid a little love and then say to Simmons, you should be this, this, and this. I'm going to kick you in the rear end. And I still think that team can work. We know from past years, not last year, that those two can succeed on the floor together. We have the numbers that tell us that. We have the data if people are interested in that. So, Jimmy Butler, there's no use talking about whether Jimmy Butler was going to stay or go. They did want him to stay. His relationship with Brett Brown was untenable. It just was. They weren't going to.
Well, but that's on them though, because we all kind of thought coming out of that Toronto series that was going to be it for Brett Brown, and they decided not to bring him back.
Right.
Which,
that's right.
I think that's one of the reasons that cost them Jimmy Butler. I don't think they were going to go to 5 years for Butler.
Probably not. And they should have. Because he was like, you talk about closing out games. Think about that series with Kawhi. Again, let's talk about bounces. Bounce, 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 bounce. 4 bounces, I think, goes through. If it doesn't, who knows? Who knows? And so Jimmy Butler was the closer in that series. It wasn't Embiid. It wasn't Simmons. It was Jimmy Butler.
It's a good thing I don't have 7 Philly fans in my life who didn't bring this up to me 100,000 times over the last 4 weeks.
Sorry, man.
It's brutal because they love Jimmy Butler in those playoffs because he was such a badass.
Oh, he was so great. Yeah,
he really was going toe to toe with Kawhi in a lot of ways. That series,
but he's in the perfect place because he is in the he was like Pat Riley's long lost second son. By the way he thinks. He's a maniac about conditioning, which is the way Pat Riley is. They still have the body fat thing going on there, where you got to, you get your body fat checked every few weeks, and there's penalties if you don't make it, and that goes across the board from 1 through 12, centers, forwards. There's different body percentage rates for each position and everything, but they believe in that. That is part of it, and Jimmy Butler lives for that. He lives for it. And
the chance to be part of like a real family, because I think like he had this in Marquette too.
Sure.
Where the more you look back at his NBA career, it seems like it was more than just being on a good team. There were all these things that he expected would happen, and he was always like bitterly disappointed at each stop. Like, well, this and this and this guy doesn't try hard, and this coach isn't good, and now he found this nirvana that he was looking for. It was, I can't remember a player who wasn't like a great player flipping the script on how everybody felt on him going forward. Because now I think people would say he's a top 8 guy.
And here's the
seems
thing.
Inconceivable.
It's also inconceivable in this day and age that you can be that dominant of a player unless you're 7 feet tall or can shoot threes. And he's neither. He is like all the mid-range people out there are saying, thank you, Jimmy. There is a place for the mid-range game. DeMar Rosen somewhere should have sent him flowers.
Well, you could probably do a documentary on this conundrum he's in. Dragic is out. Bam's 50%.
If that,
he's guarding LeBron on one end, and on the other end, the Lakers are like, we got to take out this guy. Let's put Anthony Davis on him. The number one nightmare other than Giannis you have. And he's just navigating this for multiple finals games. I'm going to guard the best player in the last 25 years on one end. And on the other end, I have this like octopus guarding me. And he had 35, 12, and 12 and was playing good defense.
Unbelievable. And to think that was sustainable. Like every time, what do the Heat need to do to win? Everyone's like, Jimmy Butler's got to score 40. I'm like, that's not how the Heat are constituted. That's not how it's supposed to work. That's too much to ask. And he finally ran out of gas, obviously, at the end. But my God, he's you said, he flipped the switch. And remember, was it 2 years ago? Well, I mean, when he's blowing his way out of Minnesota and they have all the drama there. And I mean, he's just the biggest malcontent in the league. And why would anybody take a chance on him? That was pretty much the ongoing narrative with that kid.
Tibbs,
incredible.
I talked to Tibbs about this before he got hired, and he made the point of like, hey, when we had all our dudes in Minnesota, we were really good. We were like the 5th best team in a really tough conference, and then we had injuries. But he was kind of pro. We've seen what Butler can do.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Like around, like he really still believed in him. He didn't feel burned by him at all.
No, he never felt that way. But it was the younger guys. Obviously Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns have beef. That's probably not going to go away. And
my money's on Jimmy on that beef.
Oh yeah. Well, so John Calipari called him a bully, and I was thinking, I did this story on just the two of them, and John Calipari said, "Well, he just tried to bully Karl," and I'm thinking, oh man, the last thing you need is your coach calling someone else a bully for you.
Yeah, that's not great. No. So you never told me what your big prediction was. What's your actual player movement bombshell prediction? Do you have one? That won't get aggregated by 30 blogs.
Yeah, no, there's
not something you're reporting, just a gut feeling.
Something that
I wouldn't be shocked if this happened.
I wouldn't be shocked if this happened. Ah, man. See, I just don't think it's going to happen because there's not enough time for the blockbuster. Okay. I'm going to say Chris Paul. Chris Paul's going to. Is that a blockbuster? He's on the move.
No.
So what if he goes to Milwaukee? Then it's a blockbuster?
You're putting them in the same position when Cleveland kept doing those big moves with guys who weren't as good as they used to be to try to keep LeBron there, and it just
but I think this is different. I think this is different because I think Chris Paul is good enough for what they need in Milwaukee. And think about Milwaukee now. What did they do before the pandemic started? They kept all of their starters, including the MVP and Defensive Player in the Year, at 30 minutes a game or less. And just think about how good Chris Paul would be if you kept him at 30 minutes a game or less. I think he'd be much better.
He's going to be 36 next year, which scares the hell out of me.
No,
he changed his diet. He did that whole plant-based diet thing, and it actually seemed like it had a real effect on him. What do you see the Lakers doing out of curiosity? Because I don't think they're going to have Rondo.
And they may not have Caldwell Pope, which is so funny. Isn't that ironic? I mean, he's a Rich Paul client. They brought him in. And he was the guy before they wanted to put Kyle Kuzma out into the middle of the field, put him up with the scarecrows and everything. Now first it was Contavious Caldwell Pope. Everybody, all these Lakers fans wanted him run out of town. He had a really good series for them. He had a really good finals for them. He's going to opt out, I think. Does he re-sign with them? I'm not sure.
Because he still needs to get the money back that his agents cost him a couple years ago when he turned down that extension or whatever from Detroit, and then all of a sudden it wasn't there anymore.
So let me ask you this. So Dwight Howard,
God.
But he proved to be very serviceable for them, whether you like him or not.
God.
He had a value. He did. He had a value for them.
Yeah, I guess he did.
No, he did. I don't like the way he plays. I'm sorry. I didn't like the whole Jokic thing, the goading with Jokic and all that, which didn't work because Jokic is too smart. But here's the thing. I think it's going to make him think I'm worth more than the Lakers are paying me, and someone will pay him. So maybe he moves on too.
He was such a goon in the finals. It was like watching Ken Linsman try to just high stick people.
The rat.
high stick people in the head, try to get a 2-minute slashing.
I think you're insulting Ken Linsman.
I probably am.
Yeah.
Maybe
Chris Nyland.
That Miami series, it really seemed like he was just trying to, borderline hurt Bam. Like he was just all elbows, shoulders, everything.
It's too bad too, because you do realize, I know you don't like him, but you do realize that dude is a first ballot Hall of Famer.
I know. He was the best center in the league for 7 years.
Anyway.
He really was.
But
as
you know
soon
what?
As Yao started to fade, he took over.
He told me something once that I still cannot get over. We were sitting in a restaurant in Atlanta. I think he has a house in Atlanta. I guess that's why we were in Atlanta. And he was telling me, I was talking about just centers and big men and how now everybody has to, be able to stretch the floor. And he, Dwight's shooting motion was always so nice. I'm like, can you stretch the floor? And he's like, oh man, I go into practice and I can hit 75, 15 to 16 footers in a row. I go, well then what happens? He goes, well then I get in a game and I'm like, what if I miss? Everyone's going to like make fun of me. And I'm just looking at him. I was I couldn't even believe it. And I was like, wow, that's something, I think he's worked with like a life coach or mental health counselor or whatever term, sports psychologist or whatever since that conversation. But I just was sitting there looking at him going, you're like one of the greatest big men of all time. And that's what you're telling. I couldn't believe it. It just proves how fragile all these athletes are that we think are just, bulletproof.
Well, especially somebody like him who comes in the league when he's 18. I remember I got a mailbag question, must have been like 10 years ago, from somebody who had just watched the movie Big with Tom Hanks.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
And was like, is it possible Dwight Howard is the real life version of that guy? He's like a 13-year-old trapped in a 30-year-old body. I was like, yeah, it's not impossible.
No, but he's had such a wayward journey, boy.
Well, I'm sure you could vouch for this. I mean, the Celtics really did think about him last preseason.
But they were very split.
There was a tire kick, and then they talked themselves out of it.
Well, they were very split. That group there was a lot of yays and a whole bunch of nays, and nobody was in the middle. Nobody was vacillating. He is such a polarizing player. I don't think he would have worked there, honestly.
I don't think so either. But that's how far his career had sunk. I really think LeBron is maybe the only guy who would have salvaged him. Just before we go, I know you like reading the tea leaves and reading between the lines on this stuff. The LeBron, some of the stuff he said about put some respect on my name, all that stuff. Just as somebody who's covered him his whole career, what did you take away from that?
That's who he is, this passive aggressive. It makes me mad because I thought what he did was just incredible.
Me too.
Incredible, start to finish. When people were arguing earlier in the finals about who the MVP was, I'm like, are you out of your minds? I don't care how good Anthony Davis is. There's just no way they get here without LeBron. He was spectacular in every way. He was a great leader. He played defense. He took games over. He got everybody involved that needed to get him out, including Anthony Davis, by the way. And I'm not dissing Anthony Davis. It's just like, to me, it wasn't even close. So, and then he wins and you want to you want to give him his due. We all gave him his due. But then he says that and you're like, I'm like, oh, come on now. What nonsense. Shenanigans is my famous expression for that. Absolute shenanigans. Who is not respecting you? By the way, who are all these unnamed people that didn't respect you besides Skip Bayless? Who are they?
Right. Well, I think, isn't that how you get to that point? You have to make up these imaginary slights and these little carrots.
Michael did it. I don't remember Larry ever doing that. Michael did it. I think someone told me Dr. J did it, which surprised me.
You know what's funny? So I had Dr. J on my podcast 8 years ago when I was back at Grantland. He had a lot of that in the interview, and I loved it. But a lot of I don't feel like it's Bird and Magic. I never get mentioned. It bothers me because I saved the league kind of stuff where I could tell it really bothered him. And he was right. He was the only marketable star they had for 5 years.
Yeah, there's some real truth to that. And I think it's how Isaiah Thomas feels too. We skip right over the bad boy Pistons and what they did.
I don't.
Yeah,
you and I don't.
Never. I was there for all of it. And I was embedded in that locker room. I've told people this before, when I was doing the league notes and covering all that stuff, which, gosh, it's so hard. All the guys that do it, Shams and Woj and all those guys, God bless them. I never want to do it again. I did it for a short amount of time. It damn near killed me. And but people always are like, well, the Celtics always told you everything. Wrong, man. It was the Pistons. I'd walk in there and Bill Laimbeer would be like, there's a woman in here. What the hell are you doing? And he'd be ragging all day. And I'd be like, and then everybody would leave and I'd sit down with them and go, okay, guys, what's going on?
Right.
So I had great respect for those teams. I had great respect for those guys. Isaiah, he is a smiling assassin. He has a little bit of all of them do, right? He had a little bit of a veneer that probably wasn't 100%. He's just such a
little bit. It was a lot of bit. Yeah. I think that's what got him in trouble.
I mean, he was Jimmy Butler really in a lot of ways, but he without the Jimmy Butler just never bothered with the veneer, if you will. So I think that's what did in Isaiah more than anything. Isaiah should have owned a little more of that of himself. I think he would have been better off, frankly. But when you do talk about these champions, we do always gloss over Isaiah. I'm not sure why. Think about what he accomplished at his size. Well,
here's the thing, because I remember I got it like a few months ago. I was talking about it. I still think he's the best pure point guard ever. But there's this incredible case for Chris Paul using stats.
Sure.
Right? Stats only. And if you showed them to some 15-year-old who loves basketball and loves future Daryl Morey, they would crunch the stats and they'd be like, there's no way. Chris Paul's way better than Isaiah Thomas. And they would point to like, oh, look
not
at
when
his
it matters. Not when it matters.
My thing was like, all right, first of all, I was there, so I feel like, and you were too, but I feel like that matters a little. But he was the best player and leader and most important guy on this really weird Pistons team that won 2 straight titles during this impossible era for talent, where it was just so competitive. And I just don't think Chris Paul, if you switch them, I don't care how efficient he is, I don't think he would have been able to drive that car. Well, and I honestly, nobody in the history of the league Kuzi couldn't do it way back when. He didn't win a title till Russell showed up. Isaiah's the only little guy who was the best guy on a title team like that.
And the only guy that just was like, toughness is overused all the time, but he was so nasty. And I mean that in the most positive way.
He tried to strangle his own trainer that time, remember?
Yeah. Yeah. Abdenauer? I don't remember that. I do not know that. I don't remember that.
He got elbowed in the eye and the guy came over and he got so mad and he there's a great video clip of it.
I don't remember that.
He punched Bill Cartwright. Bill Cartwright was like a foot taller than him.
Yeah, that I remember. But Mike Abdenauer is the greatest. But anyway, Isaiah reminds me of Jimmy Butler in that way. That nastiness, you can't manufacture that nastiness. And I do think it comes from people who had it really tough growing up, as both of those guys did. I mean, I remember when we were doing Basketball Love Story, one of the stories Isaiah told was, he was so talented. He lived in a horrible part of Chicago. Half the time they didn't have heat, running water, the lights were always going out, all that stuff. But he went to this, really cushy private school because he could play basketball. But he had to take a bus from the city, and then he had to take a subway. And then he had to walk like a mile and a half in a cold Chicago winter. And he said he'd be walking to school and he'd see his teammates driving by in their Mercedes with their parents. And he'd get to school and he'd be like, dude, what's the deal? And the kid would say, oh, I'm sorry, man. But, my parents, they don't really want a black kid in their car. I mean, can you imagine? That's the environment that Isaiah Thomas grew up in.
I mean, his childhood was so terrible. They made a TV movie out of his childhood. Remember? It was like Cicely Tyson was his mom or one of those kind of actors.
I don't remember
in the early mid-'80s. Yeah, I think it's on YouTube.
Oh, but there was that
breaks of the game. There was that great story about Bob Knight going to recruit him.
Yeah, so
and
sad.
People asking what they're going to get. And then Bob Knight standing up and being like, you're going to end up a loser just like him, and pointed to his older brother and stormed out. And then they were like, oh my God, what do we do? But
what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, he had a terrible childhood.
He did.
But I think it's one of those things that's what really worries me with stats. And I think Karl Malone's going to be another one that 100 years from now, hopefully the planet will still be here. But when they're looking at the basketball and they'll be like, oh, Karl Malone was the best forward of all time. Look at these
you're
stats.
Still going to blame him for this. Good God.
I'm not blaming you.
Oh, okay. Because usually you blame
I'm
me
saying
for
the statistical resume of Karl Malone that people will just look at that and they'll be like, oh, well, he did make 2 finals.
I just remember the first time analytics really started to be in vogue. There was a list, and I don't remember who compiled it, but it was a list of the all-time greatest centers. And Bill Russell was 6th. And I was like, really? Because I don't know. How about a little bit of an eye test here? 11 out of 13. And don't tell me, what they say was, well, the league was diluted. Well, Wilt Chamberlain played back then. I mean, the dude, he was pretty good. Jerry West played then. He was pretty good.
I don't understand the league was diluted thing because they had less players anyway. They had no foreign players.
And there were a lot of really amazing, Hall of Fame players playing during that time. I just 100%. Named two of like the greatest of all time. So Bill Russell.
I'm leaning more and more toward like a generational GOAT thing where there are these 4 eras. There's these 4 eras of basketball that are just so distinct
and different.
And
I agree
like even
with
Isaiah
that.
Thomas, it's like if you just put Isaiah in a time machine from 1981 and put him in the league now, he'd be like a 45% 3-point shooter.
He would be.
He would be shooting 10,000 threes every day.
And he'd be guarding you like the length of the court, which no one really does anymore. No,
but
there's always a place
when
for
he played,
like
there wasn't, you didn't shoot threes ever. And it was like a dumb shot unless you were Larry Bird trying to clinch a game, basically.
Who didn't want to shoot it either, by the way. Hated it. Still hates it.
All right. Well, next time you come on, we're bringing Bob Ryan on with us.
Oh, that would be so fun. Of course, you and I won't get to say anything, but that's okay. I love Bob Ryan.
Just going to nod. It will be us on the Zoom nodding. We're just going to prop him up. But
he's my hero. You know that. He's
mine too.
I owe so much to him in my career. God, so much. In Boston, you just need 3 people to say you're okay if you're doing my job. Will McDonough, Bob Ryan, and Red Auerbach. If you got and Larry Bird, I guess you're 4.
I mean, his nickname is literally the commissioner.
Commissioner, yeah. He's the best.
I told you this story when we were worried about the 4s closing down, how are we looking on the 4s?
Not good, man.
Not good?
No, I don't think so. I think it's over.
Oh,
I'm so sad about it. I can't
believe I even brought it up. I was telling you about going into the 4s when I was a kid, and they had a framed piece Bob Ryan wrote about the Game 6 of the 1981 finals, like his gamer, because he was like the greatest gamer ever. And I remember at Grantland, we had Brian Curtis did a feature about gamers because
really?
Bob kind of created the gamer, like it was like a column crossed with a game thing.
Unbelievable.
And so it had that frame thing, and every time I would go into the 4s before a Celtic game, and I would go and look at that thing and be like,
that's funny.
Someday I'll have a piece in the 4s. But
did you ever see him at the 4s? Because he was always there.
Are you kidding? Of course.
Yeah.
Many times.
He didn't know this, but I knew that he used to go there for dinner before the game. I was in my 20s, So I used to go there and pretend I just happened to be going there before the game. And he'd say, oh, sit with me. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Well, what a great idea. I totally did that.
We definitely accosted him a few times in the late 90s,
he never
90s.
Cared. Never.
He was available for any basketball convo. You just go right up to him and be like, hey.
Never cared.
Russell or Chamberlain.
People don't understand, I don't think, like about newspapers and his off-day notes, which was, so if the Celtics played like back-to-back games, which they did all the time, once in a great while, not often, they wouldn't practice because, now no one ever practices. But back then, you practiced every day. But once in a great while, maybe they'd be flying back from Sacramento, let's say, and they wouldn't practice the next day. But you had to have something. As a beat person, you had to have something in the paper every day. So Bob Ryan would have what we called the off-day notes, which would just be like a 60 line. For people, that's like 600 words. For most of us, it'd be 600 words. For him, it was always 1,000 words. But his off-day notes were the best thing in the paper that day. I mean, he would have these incredible, he was doing analytics before analytics. I think I've told you before, these notebooks full of all these statistics that he handed to me when I took over the beat. And he said, you must fill these out every night. Don't fall behind. And he was so right about that. So he was just so far ahead of his time.
Well, he also had, I remember I was writing a column after 2012, Derrick Rose blew out his knee.
Hey, I got my Derrick Rose. Hold on. I got to show you this. I got my Derrick Rose. Adidas.
Look at that.
Look at that. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Derrick. Yeah.
Derrick Rose blew out his knee, and I decided to write a column about asterisk titles, which I don't like the word asterisk. So it was about footnote titles.
Okay.
And I was trying to figure out, all the footnote titles and rank them. And I called Bob Ryan because I was like, hey, my dad is still complaining about Havlicek separating his shoulder in 73. Like, how big of a footnote was this? And like, literally, he had no prep at all.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, if they would have won the title that year because the next round, they were 4-0 against the Lakers, and Cowens used to kill Wilt. I think he was 28-14 against Wilt that year.
Yeah.
And I actually looked all of it up, and it was like dead on. It was like
on.
he tapped into this computer, and it was literally 40 years ago.
I can't remember the stats the day after a game.
Right.
The day after a game. And I just sit there and listen to him. I've told this story before, but we're at the World Series, when the Red Sox are about to win their first ever World Series.
Yeah.
And it's like the 5th inning, and they're winning, I forget what the score was at that point, but it was just obvious they were going to win, So he said to me, what are you going to write? I go, I don't know. Like the game's not over. I'm going to wait till the game's over. And he goes, oh, not me. Mine's done. Do you want to read it? And I was like,
oh, no.
So I read it, and it was brilliant. It was historical context. And I was like, oh, God, why am I here? I might as well just go home now, And I was sitting there, and I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, I'm not Bob Ryan. So I just have to write about how I feel as a lifelong Bostonian whose husband had the champagne popped in 86, waiting for me, all that. So that's what I ended up writing. But you can't even believe what he had conjured up in his mind. And I know he didn't have he wasn't looking any of it up. It was just unbelievable column. People should go back and look at it.
We used to sit behind the press table.
Oh,
we still do, but my dad had those tickets, and I could always kind of watch the reporters sitting there. And so a lot of people would just have their heads down. They were typing as the game was going on. And I would always see him. He was always like looking around and studying all these different things. And I would sometimes just watch him watching and be like, oh, so that's what you do.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what he's looking for. He was always trying to pick up little variables about the game, which is what, when I go to the games, I try not to look at my phone if I'm at a basketball game.
Sure.
I really want to look at stuff because you can learn so much from the way the teammates are interacting.
It's incredible. I remember the first time I walked in with him to a game. It was probably 83 or 4 or something like that. I didn't do the 81 finals. I was in college still. I got there in 82. And I walked in with him. And I mean, it's not that he knew everyone, because he did. Everyone just came right up to him. The ushers, the the timekeepers, the fans, the players, the GMs, the referees. And I was like, how do you ever get to this point? How do you ever get to the point where when you walk in, everybody wants to tell you something? It was an amazing thing to watch. It really was.
Well, that was what my favorite book ever, Breaks of the Game.
Yeah.
The thing Halberstam did, he was smart. He was like, I got to get Bob Ryan.
Yep.
And Bob Ryan became like his consigliere for the book, basically, and pointed him in all the right directions and all. So I just felt like he was like the pseudo co-author of it.
I have a framed photograph of myself and David Halberstam at Fenway Park. It's one of my treasured possessions. Yeah. He was such a wonderful man. And I was at Fenway. I mean, you're probably talking the 80s here, and maybe even like 86. I don't know, but he was there. He was talking with everyone. I just stood along the side, and then I finally introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, you do nice work." And I'm thinking, that's just what a nice, gracious man says. But then he actually, this is why I knew he was even nicer than I thought. Somehow in his brain, he conjured up something I had written to say, I liked what you did on so, like, he was just the nicest man. And I hear myself saying, can we get a photo? I was like a little kid. It was ridiculous. I cried the day he died, man. That was just a tragedy.
Yeah, that
never should have happened. Oh, horrible. Such a beautiful writer.
Next time you're on here, we're going to be with the commish.
I love it.
The real
Let's
commish, Bob Ryan. All right. So
the one and only commish. The one and only.
All right. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks. All right. Take care.